April 11th, 2026. 2:14 in the morning. Sparks, Nevada. A convoy of unmarked vehicles moved along the frontage road and killed its lights a quarter-mile short of the park. 30 agents from Homeland Security Investigations and the FBI stepped out onto cold blacktop. Canine handlers leashed their dogs on the shoulder, boots crunching the gravel, radios set to silent vibrate. The breach team finished a gear check under the thin light of one phone screen, holding the ram upright between them so the metal wouldn't clang against the asphalt. Nobody spoke above a whisper. The static of the cold air carried 2 miles over open ground, and they had learned the hard way how far sound travels on a quiet night in Nevada. The park ahead looked asleep. Birthday streamers from Saturday's parties hung limp over the gate, edges gone gray from weeks of sun. The snack window sign read closed at 9. A wind chime turned somewhere in the mini golf aisle, a single dull note that seemed louder than it should have been. Nothing moved. No lights in the office. No heat shimmer off the maintenance wing roof against the freezing dark. This was a family go-kart and mini-golf park. 2 acres of track, a tire-walled pit lane, miniature golf, an arcade. Families rented the party room on weekends. The snack window served hot dogs and nachos until 9. The arcade took in cash. The kart track turned a steady, boring profit, and that boring profit was exactly the point. The maintenance wing at the back of the pit lane had a locked roll-up door that had drawn zero attention for 9 years. That door had been opened and closed many times in the dark, by people who never saw the sky doing it. At 2:22, the breach team went in through the party room doors. The snap of the ram carried across the empty lot, clean and final, the way a door surrenders when it has never been asked to surrender before. The sound died in the gravel and the cold. Team 1 cleared the party room in 90 seconds. Empty. The tables still set with yesterday's folded napkins. The arcade. Empty. The ticket booth. Empty, the cash drawer standing open and bare. Team 2 reached the pit lane. K9 units worked the tire wall foot by foot, handlers running the dogs slow and low, letting them take in the layered scents of oil, rubber, cold concrete, and something underneath all of it that did not belong to a park. Every cart was in place. Not one engine was warm. Then, an agent in the maintenance wing opened a roll-up door that was supposed to lock from the outside. It was not locked. It had been opened and closed many times in the dark. The K9 handler's dog pulled hard at the far end of the pit lane, at the wall of painted tire stacks. 44 tires, 3 deep, stacked against the back concrete. The dog sat, hard alert. The whole team stopped moving. In the silence, you could hear the compressor cooling, the drip of a far-off drain, and nothing else, because the room behind the wall gave back no sound at all, and that was the loudest thing in the building. Agents peeled the tires apart, stack by stack, moving fast but careful, hands passing rubber over heads, a human chain working the wall down to its frame. Behind the third layer, plywood bolted to a steel frame. Behind that, a corridor 2 feet wide running the length of the maintenance wing. Duct tape sealing the seams. A padlock on a hasp. One bare bulb glowing at the far end, wire run rough and unshielded. There were 11 people behind that wall. All adults. 9 young women and 2 men in kitchen and cleaning uniforms, still creased from the plastic they had been stored in. Uniforms, it would later turn out, that had been kept clean by the same laundry service that sent the towels. all of them in the dark for 163 days. That is how the story ended. This is how they got there, and how a sound nobody was supposed to hear pulled the whole thing open. January 26th, 2026. A Monday. Sparks Police Dispatch took a non-emergency call just after noon. The caller was Rafael Ortega, 58, a part-time welder. He was at the Go-Kart park doing a repair job. He told the dispatcher something he could not explain clearly, and he did it without drama. No raised voice. No insistence that he be believed. Just a man in a cold maintenance wing, between welds, telling a stranger that something underneath him was tapping back. His son worked weekends at the park as a kart mechanic. During the January shutdown week, when the park was empty and the compressors were off, the manager had brought in a chassis jig that needed welding. Rafael came to fix it. He was in the maintenance wing alone for most of the day, his torch lit, his hood down, the park silent around him except for the hiss of gas and the tick of cooling metal. Around 11, between welds, he heard it. Metal on metal. Tapping. Coming from behind the tire wall at the far end of the pit lane. He counted it the way welders count patterns in their head. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. Repeat. Not random. Not the settling of pipes, which he had heard 1,000 times in 30 years, and which never keeps a rhythm. This was something hammering on purpose, on a schedule, waiting for the answer to hit pause so it could start again. He walked to the tire stack and pressed a hand to the painted rubber. He felt nothing through the layers. He went back to work. The tapping did not stop for hours. It kept time with the afternoon the way a metronome keeps time, patient and tireless, and the longer it went, the more it sounded less like a machine and more like a question. 3 taps. Is anyone there? 3 taps. Is anyone there? Rafael told the dispatcher he had worked in metal for 30 years and knew the difference between a pipe settling and something hitting something on purpose. He said he did not want to bother the park manager because he had no proof of anything, and he was an outside contractor who needed the work. So he called the police line that is not for emergencies. He gave his name, his phone number, the park name. That was all he had. He did not push. He did not call back that day. He went home with the sound still in his ears and told himself what outside contractors tell themselves, that it was not his business and not his proof to carry. 2 things kept it alive. First, Rafael called back the next day. He said the tapping had continued, that he had heard it again during his second shift, and that he had walked the pit lane and found the tire stack's bottom row kicked slightly out of its frame, like something inside had been pressing on it for a long time. He described the gap with a welder's precision, 2 inches, maybe 3, at the base of the far section, where the frame plate had been bent outward from the inside by repeated pressure. Second, a patrol officer assigned to check the call noticed the park came up empty in the system. No burglaries. No noise complaints. No incidents in 9 years. A business that clean, in an industrial district, was unusual enough to write down. The officer drove past, saw an empty closed park, and made the call any reasonable officer would make, but he made one more note than most officers would have bothered with. The officer left a note in the call file. 1 line. Welder reports tapping behind tire wall. No visible cause. Park history clean. That note, and the man who made the call, are where the federal case began. The park that Raphael walked through had been open to families for 9 years. Weekends brought birthday parties. Saturdays were booked 2 weeks out in summer. The snack window served hot dogs and nachos until 9. The arcade took in cash. The kart track turned a steady, boring profit. The birthdays were real birthdays. The cake was real cake. The families who signed the party room release forms never had any reason to look at the maintenance wing, because nothing about the maintenance wing ever asked to be looked at. The people who ran the park were not one family. They were a front. In October of the previous year, the cell had moved its operation under the maintenance wing. Reno and Fresno had labor pool listings, job boards, and a steady supply of people who needed work. The cell posted kitchen and cleaning jobs for the park. Wages offered were slightly above market. Housing help was promised at the interview. The interviews took place at a strip mall office that signed nothing and kept no records. The office had a business name on the door and no name on the lease. The recruiter who ran it gave a first name only and paid cash for the second month's rent, 1 month at a time, never more. Workers who took the job were brought to the park for a paid trial shift. The pitch was simple, and it worked because it sounded good. Come in for 1 paid shift. If it works out, the room and the steady pay both start the same week. None of them worked a trial shift. They were held in the room behind the tire wall, reached through a corridor hidden inside the maintenance wing, on the far side of the compressor room, where the noise made conversation useless and the tap of a hand against concrete was swallowed by machinery, running all day and all night. 11 people were held there. 163 days. Among them, Elena Vasquez, 26. She had come north from Fresno in October, answering an ad for kitchen prep work at a family park. She sent most of her first paycheck home before the first week ended. She had told her mother the room was small but fine, that the work was hot and the hours long, and that she would send more once she was up to speed. After the first week, the checks stopped, and the phone that had answered every Sunday went silent. Her father, Hector, filed a missing person report with Fresno police in November. Elena's phone had gone dead 14 days after she accepted the job. Her rental room was clean. Her bed was made. Her wallet was there. Just the girl gone. Fresno PD logged her as a missing adult and moved on, as they do, because a 26-year-old going quiet over a holiday season is not, by the numbers, a case that solves itself, and nobody had a reason yet to connect a missing kitchen worker in Fresno to a go-kart park 400 miles away in Sparks. Men took the second job opening, cleaning, and grounds work. 2 of them, both in their 30s, recruited off the same Fresno job board, 48 hours apart. They told the recruiter the truth about why they needed the room. One was 4 months behind on rent. The other had a daughter in Bakersfield he was trying to send money to. That honesty cost both of them their freedom, because the recruiter was listening for exactly that kind of answer. Desperate people, the cell had learned, do not ask hard questions and do not make trouble if the money is slow. They were each promised a room that never materialized and a clean job that ended the moment the maintenance wing door closed behind them. 9 of the 11 were young women, ages 22 to 26. All recruited the same way. All brought to the park for a paid trial shift. All held in the room behind the tires. The room had been built to hold people who could be moved in a night, and the cell had gotten good at moving them. The corridor was too narrow for the recruits to know how many others were ahead of them, and the schedule of the maintenance crew was designed so that no two held people ever saw the same outside face at the same time. That is who was behind the wall the night the K-9 sat. But the federal case did not start with a raid. It started with a suspicious noise report and a welder who counted to 3. Sparks PD sat on the report for 9 days. It was not a credible-looking lead. Park management, when asked about the tire wall, explained it was a sound-dampening installation for the track, that the paint had packed the rubber, and that an old drainage pipe ran behind the stack. The ambient tapping, they said, was the pipe. The explanation was plausible enough to satisfy a patrol officer with a full shift ahead of him. It was the kind of answer a manager gives fast, without irritation, without over-explaining, because the cell had rehearsed the answer years ago, and the manager was simply reading the script. The note sat in the file. Early February. A task force analyst with the Homeland Security Task Force for Nevada pulled the call file during a routine sweep of recent reports involving commercial property. It should have been nothing. She was looking for patterns the uniform side missed, connections between a noise complaint and a utility anomaly, and this one had a single line in it that made her pause. Tire wall. She had seen that phrase once before, in a different context she could not place. So she ran the park name. That began to pull on the thread. The park's power draw was the first fact that did not add up. The utility records showed the maintenance wing consuming 4 times the load of the arcade, every week, all winter. The arcade had video games, air conditioning, fluorescent lighting, a cash register. The maintenance wing had a workbench, a compressor, and a tool cabinet. A wing with no resident tenants, no showers, no staff kitchen, no employees overnight, running 4 times the electrical load of a working arcade. Those numbers could not both be true. The analyst checked the meter history twice, then 3 times, because pulling a 4 times load all winter meant some appliance in that wing was running around the clock, and the only appliance a maintenance wing genuinely needs around the clock is heat, and the only reason a sealed room behind a wall needs heat in February is if something in it is alive and would complain. The second fact arrived with a routine request for vendor records. The park paid a commercial laundry service 40 pounds of towels a week. A venue with no showers, no staff locker room, no lodging, ordered 40 pounds of towels weekly, year-round. The laundry invoice listed the same pickup schedule for every week of October, November, December, January. The park was closed to the public in the winter. The towels kept coming. 40 pounds a week is not a cleaning rag supply. 40 pounds a week is linens for people who have no way to wash them themselves. 2 numbers. The power draw and the towels. On their own, either could be explained by a careless manager or an automated billing error. Together they described one thing, a room with people in it that was not supposed to be there. The analyst flagged the file for the task force coordinator and attached a single sentence to the flag. Maintenance wing draws power like it has tenants. Order of towels like it has staff. I think the tenants are the staff. That is the point where a noise complaint from a part-time welder landed on a federal desk. The case agent was a Homeland Security Investigations special agent named Diane Calloway. 31 years on the Border Task Force side of the agency, most of it labor exploitation work. She read the Sparks file in one sitting, at 9 in the evening, in an office with the blinds half drawn and a cold cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink. She read it twice. Then she read the welder's 2 call log entries a 3rd time, slowly, the way you read a testimony you are about to hang a case on. Calloway does not work from dramatic evidence. She works from arithmetic. The power draw and the towel order were arithmetic. So she did not start with a warrant. She started with a walk. She drove to the park on a Tuesday afternoon in the third week of February. The park was closed for the season. She parked on the frontage road, walked the empty lot, and looked at the pit lane tire wall from 40 feet, which was as close as a civilian could get without climbing a fence. She stood long enough that a groundskeeper in a maintenance uniform looked up at her once, then went back to his work without waving. That lack of greeting, she noted later, was itself an observation. A staff man at a closed park who does not acknowledge a stranger staring at his wall is a man who has been told not to make eye contact. What she saw from that distance was a tire stack that was too deep. Tire walls for cart tracks are usually 1 layer thick as a barrier. 3 deep, painted over in matching color, arranged as a working wall, with the bottom row of the far section sitting slightly proud of the frame, was load-bearing construction, not track safety. Somebody had built a wall inside a park that had never had a real accident that needed one. A single-layer wall stops a cart. 3 layers stop a sound, and a view, and a question. She went back to the office and asked the analyst to pull the ownership chain for the park. That is where the case turned. The owner of record was a shell company. The shell was registered to a second shell. The second shell was managed by a holding firm whose address was a mail drop in Las Vegas. None of it connected to a living person. The layers did not even share a street address with each other, which meant they had been built deliberately, 1 per year, by someone methodical enough to let each shell age before adding the next. The park was a front, and the front was layered deep enough that a normal record search would never reach a human being. That level of layering costs money and takes intent. It is not how a family business operates. It is how an operation that expects federal attention builds walls before the walls matter. Callaway had seen this exact architecture once before, in a labor case out of Phoenix, and the resemblance tightened her certainty by about a full notch. Callaway briefed the task force. The unit had a name problem. The suspicion was forced labor, held people, behind a wall. But the proof was arithmetic and a single noise complaint. There was no witness inside. There was no way to confirm 11 people without a search warrant. And there was no legal basis for a warrant based on towels and a power bill alone. She had the thread in her hand. She could not pull it yet. So the task force did surveillance instead. For 6 weeks, agents watched the park. The park was closed, and the park was not closed. A box truck arrived every Thursday evening and left 3 hours later, and the agents cataloged what it carried by the weight and the curves it took at the corner before the storage unit. A sedan arrived Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at night, stayed an hour, left, and its driver never once used the park entrance. He entered through a gap in the fence at the back that no customer had ever used. 2 men in park maintenance uniforms, branded with the park's logo, were photographed on the pit lane twice a week, methodically restacking the tire wall with their backs to the maintenance wing, in a pattern that suggested counting, not decorating. They moved the same tires in the same order every time, and the wall never looked different afterward, because the point of the work was to verify the wall was still sealed, not to maintain it. The agents counted the food deliveries. A catering company delivered prepared meals to the front office every 2 days. The volume matched a larger group than the 3 maintenance uniforms they could see. The catering invoices, pulled later under the warrant, showed the park paying for meal portions in quantities for 14 people a week. 14, not 3, not 11, because the cell was feeding its own arrest crew alongside the 11. One team followed the Thursday box truck to a storage unit 8 miles down the frontage road. The storage unit was rented under another shell. Inside, according to a consensual snapshot of the packing list left on a pallet, were commercial kitchen supplies, cleaning equipment, and shipping materials, the raw inventory of 11 people being reclothed, resupplied, and prepared, on some schedule, to be moved as a group. None of that was evidence of a crime that would survive a judge. But it was enough to build a picture, and the picture had a spine. The spine was the maintenance wing and the tire wall. The obstacle at that stage was simple. The task force could watch forever, but without probable cause they could not get through the roll-up door. And the longer the watches went, the more exposed the whole operation got to a leak. Task forces of this size share people and parking lots and coffee shops. A cell that had survived 9 years of clean records had, at minimum, kept an eye on land records and police activity around the park. If the crew sensed the park was being watched, the 11 people behind the wall could be moved in a night, and every name, every shell, every recorded wire would vanish with them. The cell had a logistics plan for exactly that. The box truck, the storage unit, the shipping materials, built so that a wall that emptied itself in 4 hours would leave behind nothing but paint and plywood and a story about a seasonal shutdown. The pressure was not just legal. It was arithmetic against a clock. Calloway made the estimate the way she made all her estimates, 11 people times 16 weeks of holding, and each week that the watchers sat outside without probable cause was a week the likely harm inside the wall kept compounding. She told the coordinator that if the 11th held person had been taken all the way back in January, then every day of February was a day the case was already late. Then the case caught 2 breaks at once. The first break was a federal plea in Las Vegas. In the same weeks, federal prosecutors were running a racketeering case against 3 members of the same gang structure, built on kidnapping and murder charges in Clark County. The case was older than the park lead. It had its own evidence, its own witnesses, its own timeline. It was not part of the Sparks work and had not been planned as such. But the ledger surfaced in that case placed the park cell as a funding arm of the same racketeering structure. Wage skims, recruitment fees, and cash from the park's job placement operation flowed into the same accounts federal prosecutors had already linked to the Las Vegas convictions. The Sparks cell was not a lone crew. It was a tentacle of a structure with a documented history of violence in another county. That changed the value of the Sparks file from a nuisance complaint to a shared investigative asset, and it gave Calloway's arithmetic a predicate it had not had before. The second break arrived 10 days later. A registered informant came forward. He was a driver who had worked the Thursday box truck route for 6 weeks in late winter. He had been arrested a year earlier on a federal charge in the District of Nevada, and had been cooperating on and off since. He knew the cell from the outside. He had never been inside the maintenance wing. He told Calloway he had started asking himself why a closed go-kart park needed a weekly catering delivery for 14 and a laundry order for 40 pounds of towels, and that asking questions out loud in the parking lot had got him a warning he understood enough to go home and make a call. What he gave Calloway was not a witness account of the victims. It was corroboration of the arithmetic. He described weekly cash collections, a wage log that never matched the hours, workers who exited the truck into the maintenance wing and never came into the light, and a supervisor who told him, once, to never ask about the towels. He described the way the maintenance crew never picked up the food crates themselves, how the catering driver left the crates at the back gate and was told to go. He described the sedan driver's habit of circling the block before stopping, the same habit the surveillance footage had caught 3 nights running. He also gave the task force its first legal lever. He signed a statement. Under federal law, that statement, alongside the power records, the laundry invoices, the surveillance photographs, and the mail drop ownership chain, crossed the line from suspicion to probable cause. A federal search warrant was drafted. Its core target was the maintenance wing. Its stated intent was to locate individuals held against their will and to document evidence of forced labor and racketeering. The affidavit was 6 pages long and leaned on the towels, the power draw, and the signed informant statement, in that order, because those 3 stood on their own without the tire wall ever being mentioned as a certainty. The warrant judge signed it on a Tuesday afternoon. The hardest part of the case was over. The legal wall had been breached on paper before the physical one was. But the hardest part of the case being over did not mean the dangerous part was over. Here is the point where the case almost came apart. The warrant was approved on a Tuesday. The raid was set for the following Sunday night, going into Monday morning, when the park was closed to the public, and the maintenance crew's 2 scheduled presence nights were quiet ones. The tactical plan was built around a single quiet breach: the tire wall seam, the ram through the plywood frame, the corridor swept in one pass, and rehearsed twice at the off-site staging hotel with a mock wall of marked tape on the floor. Then, 48 hours before the breach, the case agent was told, "The cell may know." The origin of the leak was never confirmed. All that was confirmed was a pattern in the surveillance. The Monday, Wednesday, Friday sedan changed its route. It stopped arriving at the park and started circling the frontage road, slow sweeps, turning around at the storage unit, running the road past the park twice before leaving. It paused at the frontage road entrance one night, stayed a full minute facing the gate, then drove off without entering. A car that circles and does not stop is a car checking for observers. The agents recognized it immediately because it is what they do themselves, and they recognized the doubled-up hesitation as the signature of a crew that had been told to look for something. The task force faced a choice. Option 1 was to move the raid up by an evening, accept a thinner perimeter, fewer support units, and risk that the cell's own lookouts had not yet connected the watching to a raid. Option 2 was to hold the schedule, risk that the cell had already started relocating the 11 people, and find an empty wall. There was a third option, and it was the one they took. They did not move the raid. They moved the people in front of it. The task force brought in 2 additional HSI teams from the Reno field office and an FBI evidence response unit normally stationed in Las Vegas. The extra units drove up on Saturday afternoon, staged at an off-site hotel, and were briefed in a conference room with the curtains drawn. Only the case lead and the tactical commander knew the full plan until 90 minutes before the breach. Every phone in the briefing room was left at the front desk in a sealed box, because a task force leak had burned one prior operation in this exact region, and nobody was willing to repeat that lesson. The informant's schedule for Sunday night was canceled. He was given no reason. The sedan that circled the frontage road watched an empty building that night because the park looked exactly as it always looked, which was the point. No lights came on. No new vehicles appeared. The maintenance crew ran its normal schedule in the daytime, and the wall sat sealed through the dark, and the watchers outside could only wait and count the hours, the way the people inside the wall had been counting days. At 1 in the morning on April 11th, the combined task force moved. 30 agents, 4 K9 units, 2 containment teams for the Washoe County addresses, 1 evidence team, 1 air unit orbiting north of the city in case any of the 3 addresses produced a runner. The convoy killed its lights a quarter-mile out, and the team walked the final approach on foot over gravel, radios silent, boots placed heel-toe, the breech ram carried between 2 agents, who had rehearsed the carry so many times they moved like one body. The element that almost failed the whole plan was not tactical. It was a locked door. The raid plan called for a quiet approach to the maintenance wing roll-up door from the pit lane side, using the tire wall as concealment. But the tire wall had been restacked that week, and restacked wrong. The seam where 2 sections met had been pushed forward, blocking the exact gap the breach team had plotted for the ram. The tactical commander made the call in the field, without radio traffic, with a hand signal. The breach team went in through the party room doors instead, cleared the main building, and worked back toward the maintenance wing from the inside. It added 90 seconds and cost them nothing. It was the single decision, later written up in the after-action report, that kept the corridor intact until the K9 could work the wall. 2:22. The ram hit the party room door. The sound carried across the empty lot. Team 1 cleared the party room, the arcade, the ticket booth. 90 seconds. Empty. Team 2 reached the maintenance wing. The roll-up door was unlocked from the outside, in a way it should never have been. The K9 pulled hard at the far end of the pit lane and sat at the tire wall. Agents pulled the stacks apart. Behind the 3rd layer, plywood on a steel frame. A corridor. A padlock. 1 bare bulb. They opened the padlock with bolt cutters and went in. Behind the wall, 11 adults. 9 young women and 2 men. All in kitchen and cleaning uniforms. All in the dark. The conditions were consistent with prolonged confinement. The task force did not call out for a statement of harm. They called out for one thing, that everyone in the room answer by name. 11 voices answered. The room was small, the ceiling low, the air still and close, and the bare bulb threw long shadows of 11 people who blinked against a light some of them had not seen with their own eyes in months. None of the 11 resisted leaving. That detail, the case lead later wrote, told the whole story. People who are at work do not file out through a wall in the dark without a word. People who have been held file out fast, without packing anything, because the door is open, and they have learned that open doors do not stay open. They walked the corridor single file, heads down, hands loose, saying nothing, following the agents' flashlights out into the cold night air, as if they were afraid the lights would go out again before they reached the vehicles. They were taken straight to renowned Regional Medical Center for evaluation under federal witness protocol. Initial medical review found conditions consistent with being held in a confined space for months. The victims were not processed as suspects. They were processed as witnesses, then as victims, under the Federal Victim Assistance Program. Warm blankets were passed down the line before anyone was asked a question, and the first thing most of them said, over and over, was the same single word: water. Meanwhile, the simultaneous takedowns went out across Washoe County. At 3 addresses in Sparks and Reno, 9 arrests, made without incident. The arrests did not come close to the same household in one night. They were spread across 3 addresses, per the warrant. At one address, the occupants were found in bed. At another, 2 men in the kitchen over paperwork. At the third, a single occupant who came to the door in a bathrobe and said, without being asked, "I knew it would be tonight." That man gave a full statement by breakfast. At the third address, agents found evidence tied to the operation. 14 rifles, mostly AR platform, recovered from a closet behind a false panel. $612,000 in cash, bagged inside used cart tire cores, stacked in a corner of the same closet. The cash was packaged the way laundered money often is, in small bills, in sealed bags, with tire cores as the carrying container, because they are heavy, hollow, and get moved out of parks routinely, as track waste. The tire cores had been dusted with tire powder, so that a casual glance read them as used track inventory, not as a vault. The raid recovered 3 categories of property that day. 11 people, 14 rifles, $612,000. Each one was logged separately, with a different set of forms, by a different crew. The people went to a hospital. The rifles went to a ballistic vault. The cash went to a counting room and was deployed 2 agents deep at every turn. The ledger that tied it all together was recovered not at the park, but at the first arrest address, in a kitchen drawer beneath a stack of takeout menus. It was a paper ledger, hand-kept, with columns for recruitment, wages, deductions, and a transfer line that matched dates and amounts to the Las Vegas racketeering accounts. Paper, because the cell did not trust the accountant, and the accountant would not touch a computer. The ledger's final entry, dated the afternoon before the raid, recorded a wage deduction for each of the 11 names, and a transfer line to an account that had not yet been served with a freeze order. The Bureau kept the park's name out of the affidavit for 6 weeks. The families who had rented the party room for birthdays, the summer league that raced carts on Tuesdays, the neighbors who bought nachos at the window, none of them knew what had sat behind the tire wall 30 feet from where their children had celebrated. The park's public record, for those 6 weeks, was a quiet statement that seasonal maintenance work had been postponed. The parents who called about their deposits got the same calm answer every time, and the party room bookings for summer went out on schedule as if nothing had ever been behind the wall at all. Then the federal case moved on its own clock. On June 30th, 2026, the Department of Justice in the District of Nevada announced the convictions. 3 members of the gang structure were convicted on charges including murder, kidnapping, and racketeering. The announcement named the Las Vegas structure and the racketeering enterprise. The Sparks Cell's ledger had fed evidence into that case, its wage skim tied to the same accounts. The convictions did not mention the park by name. The 9 arrests in Washoe County did not all clear the file. 3 of the 9 were charged with federal counts including forced labor, kidnapping, and racketeering. The other 6 were held on state detainer or released pending further review. One of the 9, the sedan driver who had made the slow nightly sweeps, is still a fugitive as of the date of this account. He was released on the wrong set of fingerprints at a court appearance and did not return. A federal warrant for his arrest remains active. He is the one who circled the frontage road the week the case almost broke, and he is the one who was already gone by the morning the takedown went out. $612,000 recovered. The ledger showed that was not all of it. The columns recorded transfers above and beyond what the tire cores held. A portion of the cash trail runs to accounts that froze on the day of the indictment and have not been released, under multiple names, none of them the surviving defendants. Some of the money is still out there, in a form the case file cannot name. What is known is that the recovered amount was the cash on hand, not the total moved. The laundry service, the catering company, the shell company fees, the strip mall office rent, all of it had been paid out of a stream that the recovered $612,000 did not begin to cap. 14 rifles recovered. The recovered total equaled the count agents had projected from the cell's procurement notes, but the notes referenced transactions that predated the current crew. Some of the weapons are still not accounted for. The Bureau has not located a portion of the armory that the paper trail suggests existed before this cell took over the park. The recovered rifles were traced in several instances to prior owners who listed the weapons as lost or sold years earlier. One rifle traced to a prior owner in Arizona who filed it lost in 22 and never filed a second report because the weapon was sold the same month it was reported lost, and the paper trail between those two facts is still closed. The 11 victims recovered. All 11 survived. 9 young women and 2 men. 3 of the young women were identified only through dental records during the first week because they had been recruited so far from Nevada that their families did not know to file locally, and the recruitment paperwork was fake. One young woman, Elena Vasquez, 26, was the first identified by name when her father's Fresno missing person report matched the description. She spent 4 days at Renown and was released into the custody of Federal Victim Services. Her mother flew in from Fresno on the 3rd day and waited outside the hospital until visiting hours. Elena was listed as found on the night of the raid. She was the one whose trial shift never ended, whose checks stopped after the first week, whose phone went dead 14 days after she accepted the job, and whose father's 1-page missing person report, filed in November, was the first name a federal clerk eventually matched to a face at the hospital. The park reopened in May for the summer season. Birthday parties resumed on Saturdays. The snack window opens at noon and closes at 9. The tire wall at the pit lane was rebuilt to a single layer, the depth of a normal track barrier. The maintenance wing was stripped by evidence personnel and repainted. The corridor was sealed with concrete block after the evidence teams finished, and the roll-up door was rekeyed and relocked from the outside, the way it was always supposed to be. A small number of the park's summer staff, hired after the raid, know only that seasonal maintenance was delayed by 6 weeks. The man who started it never learned what his phone call became. Rafael Ortega finished his welding work in the first week of February, was paid in cash, and did not return to the park. The case agents tried to reach him at the number he left with dispatch. The number was disconnected. He is one of the few people connected to the case who was never formally interviewed, because nobody could find him to tell him what he had set in motion. He is out there somewhere, a welder who counted to 3 on a quiet morning, who filed a report he was told was probably nothing, and who will never know that 11 people walked out of a wall because he pressed his hand to the rubber and believed what he heard on the other side. What is worth holding on to from this case is the arithmetic of it. The power draw, the towel order, the tire wall that was too deep. Any single number could have been explained away. Together, they described a room that should not have existed, and a man with no reason to be believed gave the first one of those numbers to a police line that is not for emergencies. The trick of the whole operation, the part that made it work for years, was not sophistication. It was that the park looked exactly ordinary. Families celebrated there. The cash drawer was honest at the front. The towels and the power could have stayed nothing forever if a welder had not counted a rhythm on a quiet morning when the compressors were off. The network is dismantled. The demand that created the room behind the wall still exists. Somewhere in this country, another park, another warehouse, another building with a good front door and a wall that is too deep, is doing the same arithmetic, waiting for somebody to hear the pattern in it. The victims are found. The fugitive is still free. The money that was not in the tire cores is still out there. Rafael Ortega made one phone call, with no proof and nothing to gain, in January. He is the reason 11 people walked out into the light of an empty Nevada morning. He never even